Well, that was a perfect introduction. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, on the Oxfordshire Community Foundation, as Chris said, it's really focused on serving the needs of the county wherever they're most extreme. And you can imagine that over the last few years, that's been the pandemic, but now it's the cost of living crisis. And I think it's been so helpful to hear the global and the national context, but I thought to bring it a bit down also to our own county and city. First of all, to say, I think something we often say about climate change, which is so true, is that the people who've contributed least to the problem are the people who are suffering the most. And that's absolutely the same in Oxfordshire when it comes to the energy. Is it on? Try to speak louder, sorry. So I think the people who've contributed least to the climate crisis are the people suffering the most. And when you look at Oxfordshire and the energy situation, it's just the same. And to give a few examples, when we ran a consultation with local grassroots charities to say, what do you need in this crisis? The kind of examples we got back were a food bank, which is facing more demand than ever before, but it's got a huge chiller where it keeps the waste food, but it can't afford to keep paying the bill for that chiller. Or we've got the example of people who want to go along to get debt advice because they're spiraling into debt with their energy and with their accommodation, and the advice centre can't handle the tripling of calls that they're getting. Or even the Domestic Abuse and Rape Crisis Centre, where they said, we've got people missing appointments because they can't afford the fuel to get there. So this energy crisis is hitting people in the most fundamental ways in their life. And I think also Oxfordshire, we can sometimes, and certainly any visitor to Oxfordshire can think it's a really wealthy county, and it definitely is. There's plenty of wealth around, but also there's huge amounts of poverty, and especially because it's such an expensive county, people are already struggling and have been for decades with paying for their accommodation. And in Oxfordshire, once you take away families paying for accommodation costs, 1 in 10 of the children growing up in our county are living in poverty. And in our city, that's 1 in 7 in Oxford. So poverty is definitely an Oxfordshire and Oxford issue. But what does that mean then for solving the climate and the energy crisis? I want to give you some really practical solutions, and I think that I've got 2.5, and you can judge whether the half really counts. So first one, as both our speakers have touched on already, is retrofits. It's always been the tedious and unsexy subject of climate change, but it's the most fundamental one. In Oxford as a city, 80% of our emissions come from our buildings, and most of that is from the residential sector. So that's where we've got to start. At the same time, it seems to be an evening where everyone's chucking in additional crises. So I'm going to bring my own, not a personal one. It's on the skills crisis, because the problem is we're hearing from employers, they can't find the people with the skills that they need. And that's particularly true when it comes to green skills. There is demand. There's demand in this county. As somebody who can put my hand up and say, I've got an air source heat pump as of last month, but how long did we have to wait to find the people who had the skills? There's serious problems in that supply chain. There's also people in Oxfordshire who've been locked out of the labour market. There's people who have got jobs, but they don't pay enough for them to be able to live a decent life. So we've got this huge crisis, but also an opportunity where if we can skill up local people to have rewarding, well-paid jobs, delivering the retrofits that we need, tackling the energy and the climate crisis, our county will be better in at least 3 different ways. And if anyone's got a question about apprenticeships, definitely ask me. But for example, we've discovered that Oxford University has got a fund of money to support local apprenticeships, and we're going to be tapping into that. So there's work, I think, that as local philanthropy that we can do to help support people who maybe have struggled to get into the labour market, maybe can't pay for the transport to get to the job where they could get trained up. How can we get involved there when the council is driving more work on retrofits? And I've got nothing but praise really to say to the councils that we've partnered with here. Oxfordshire County Council, we've teamed together on quite a few funds where we've put our funding in to keep community centres warm and cost of living. So I want to point to one international example. So Barcelona, city of Barcelona, a bit bigger than Oxford, but still, what they've done is it's not just about the retrofits of the actual buildings. They've trained up energy advisors who go to the most vulnerable households to give them energy efficiency advice. But even better, the people that they're hiring and training to be those advisors are people who've historically not been in employment. So they're increasing employment in the area, as well as finding the exact people who know how to give the right, meaningful advice, because they've been there in that same situation. Secondly, I'm going to say transport. I was in Manchester recently and heard Andy Burnham talk really inspiringly about what they're doing there. So he's taking back control of the local bus system so that he can make sure the fares are actually affordable. He's procuring a fleet of 50 electric buses so that the transport that the city's provided is not polluting and causing the air pollution that Greg mentioned. And at the same time, they're doing the basics that are so necessary to get people back onto public transport. They're teaming up with the local police to make sure that it feels safe to use at night. They're making sure that it serves the villages and the towns around Manchester so that people who need the jobs can get in, and anyone who has struggled with the bus to get into Oxford and to work will have sympathy there. And I think the question there is, so let's say a council did that, what can philanthropy do? What can we as individuals when we give? I think looking at the incremental costs, because I think I agree we should challenge the idea that there's a green premium and that doing good always costs more. But when you're a community group, doing something new can often cost more. For example, if we've got somebody who is collecting young people with special needs to take them to a support and social group, that bus shouldn't be diesel, that should be electric. If we've got a local sharing library that's helping people borrow tools from each other, we want to make sure that they're using their cargo bike and that we can support with that. So there's lots of practical actions where philanthropy can provide small amounts of money that would transform how those groups are working and make sure that they're keeping the areas that they work in. And of course, let's not forget, what always happens is that it is the poorest and most disadvantaged people who live in the most polluted areas. So we want to make sure that anyone who's providing service in those areas is definitely not contributing to that pollution problem. So I think there's a lot that we can do on those incremental costs on clean transport. So my final solution, which I think is only a half one, but I think it's really necessary, is just about the absolute immediate support right now. And I think maybe for lots of us, it's quite hard to see all the support on energy bills is basically just subsidizing fossil fuels, and it feels like, is that really going to solve the problem? No, it's not. But if we let the most vulnerable people in society absolutely fall off the abyss into not being able to pay for food and for heating, we're going to have a social crisis on our hands, and we can't turn to those people and ask them to be part of moving towards the greener environment that we need. If people can't even afford to feed their children, that's got to come first. So I think right now, in this immediate crisis, as we go into cold weather, we have to be supporting people with basic cost of living, and that's got to come first. And we've got to use the few months' time that buys us to think about how do we then invest in these much longer term solutions, the skills, the cleaner transport. And so I will just make a small plug to say we have a cost of living fund. We've got £100,000 of our own money. The county council has matched that, and people are donating their rebate every day. So if you feel that you can and you want to give to support the grassroots charities in Oxford that are providing these basic services, there's leaflets on that desk. But yeah, anyway, in conclusion, I want to say that I really do think that tackling the energy and the climate and the skills crisis, we can 100% do. And I've given up following what even happens in COP. I used to work for national government. I used to work for a global organisation. I really think Oxfordshire and Oxford is where it's happening. So I think let's stop looking upwards and to others and sort it out ourselves.